Welcome to Michael's Musings on Music. Today we're going to discover what a time signature is. At the start of a written piece of music, in the top left-hand corner, you will see a pair of numbers, one written over the other. This is called a time signature. Looks very much like this. Here's an example. The top number and the bottom number tell us something different. So let's start with the top number. The top number tells us the number of beats allowed in each measure. So to understand that, we need to define what a beat is and what a measure is. Now, a beat is a pulsation that divides time into equal lengths. A good example is a ticking clock. Every minute, a clock ticks 60 seconds, and you can think of each second as a beat. A measure, sometimes called a bar, is a segment of written music contained within two vertical lines. Here's an example of a measure. See the lines on either side of the notes? So the top number tells you the number of beats allowed in each one of these measures. So in this time signature, the top 4 means that each measure or bar would contain 4 beats. Let's look at some other time signatures to get that point. We're just looking at the top number now. This is a 3/4 time signature. The top 3 tells you that there are 3 beats in every measure. How about this one? 2/4. The top 2 says there are 2 beats in every measure. Okay, so that's what the top number means. Let's look at the bottom number. The bottom number tells us what kind of note gets 1 beat. Now, you'll recall at an earlier talk we introduced the notes, and let me just give you a quick recap just of what they look like. There's a whole note right here, half note, quarter note, looks like this, eighth note, right? So, this bottom number in the time signature corresponds to the type of note that gets 1 beat. So, if the number on the bottom of the time signature is a 1, that is a whole note. A whole note lasts 1 beat. 2 is a half note. A half note, in this case, gets 1 beat. The numbers make sense because there are 2 halves and 1 whole. So if we continue to go down the chart, 4 is a quarter note. A quarter note gets 1 beat. The number 4, because there are 4 quarters and a whole. 8 is an eighth note. An eighth note gets 1 beat, etc. The main thing to remember is that each number corresponds to a note, and that note lasts 1 beat. So let's look at a few time signatures to kind of get the hang of it, okay? Now that we can read both the top and the bottom number. So here's a time signature of 6/8. Top number means 6 beats in every measure. The bottom 8 means an eighth note gets a beat. Here's another example. 2/2. 2 beats in every measure. What's the bottom 2 mean? A half note in this case gets 1 beat. Here's one more. 3/1. 3 beats in a measure. A whole note gets a beat. All right, let's see this in action with some actual musical notation. Let's see a few different ways you could notate 4/4. It could look like this. The bottom number says a quarter note gets 1 beat, and there are 4 quarter notes. Therefore, 4 beats in the measure. Checks out. It could also look like this. A half note gets 2 beats. Now, why does a half note get 2 beats? Because the bottom 4 of the time signature tells us that a quarter note gets 1 beat, and by a simple mathematical relation, we can figure out that a half note gets 2 beats, 2 quarters and a half. Because a half note gets 2 beats, and there are 2 half notes in the example, that equals 4 beats in the measure, satisfying the top number of 4. How about this one? This is a whole note. Does this work with our 4/4 time signature? Well, if a quarter note gets 1 beat, and a half gets 2 beats, as we've already seen, then a whole note gets 4 beats, 4 quarters and a whole. And the top number of the time signature says that that is all the beats allowed in a measure. So what I want to stress is, since we know that a quarter note gets a beat because of this bottom number 4, By simple mathematical relations of whole, half, quarter, eighth, we know the number of beats all the other notes would get as well. So let's try a different bottom number. Here's a time signature of 3/8. 3 beats in the measure, 8 means an eighth note gets a beat, not a quarter note in this case. So because we now know that an eighth note gets a beat, that means a quarter note gets 2 beats, because there's 2 eighths and a quarter. And if a quarter note gets 2 beats, a half note gets 4 beats, 2 quarters and a half. And if a half gets 4 beats, a whole note in this case gets 8 beats, 2 halves and a whole. Again, the main point I want to stress is that the bottom number determines what kind of note gets 1 beat, whether it's a whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note. And from there, we're able to figure out the value of all the other notes. So now, of course, there are many different combinations of notes and rests you can put in each measure. This example is more complicated, but it observes the 4/4 time signature because the notes and rests add up to 4 beats, with a quarter note getting 1 beat. So what a time signature and measures, what they do is they make sense and order out of an onslaught of notes and rests. It gives order to the rhythm of the music. Next time, we'll talk about the pitches of the notes and how they're organized.